my screen bigger.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Just Two Dads with my partner and co-host, Mr. Sean Francis. I am Brian Altunian, and today's conversation is going to be fascinating. How a family deals with, handles, processes a diagnosis, and all of the things that we go through, and the creative outlets that we access to be part of that process. Today's conversation with Ben Decter is going to be really interesting. I'm very excited to be having this conversation, and I think you're going to be interested in what we have to talk about today on Just Two Dads. Hello, everybody. I'm Brian Altunian along with Sean Francis. We are Just Two Dads. We started this podcast 4 years ago. We're in our fourth season. We're at 190 episodes, and we started this because we were just two dads of children who had diagnosis of some kind, and we were having conversations about how we process the information as dads, and we started having conversations with folks who we were so enamored by the fact that there were great people out there doing great things for the special needs community, and we didn't know about them. And we thought, well, how is it that if we don't know about them, maybe a lot of people don't know about them. When we started this conversation to shine the light on those folks that are doing amazing things for the community, whether it's by service or in this particular case, it's really by doing something creative. We're really excited about today's conversation. And before we do that, thanks, Sean. I just want to thank, if you're catching us live on Facebook, please leave us a comment. If you're catching us after the fact on our YouTube channel or on our website at justtodadspodcast.com. You can find all of our videos. Probably 185 of the 190 are up there. I don't think you want to see some of the early ones. They're Sean and I had no idea what we were doing. Actually, today we don't really have an idea of what we're doing. But that's life, right? That's life as a father, as a parent of a special needs child. We take life as it comes. We process the world differently, just like our children. Thank Billy Footwear, our sponsor, our partners who have done a lot of work to help us, and they do great stuff. They create adaptive footwear. Folks who are having a difficult time putting their shoes on, and they, by the way, don't have to be members of the special needs community. Very great styles of footwear for people who just struggle putting their shoes on, and that can mean a whole bunch of folks. So anyways, go to Billy Footwear. If you click on the link on our show notes, you get 15% off your final tab. So even if they're having a sale, you get another 15% off. So we thank Billy Footwear for being a part of the Just Two Dads family. And we'll get into other stuff as well. But if you're catching us on our podcast outlets or on any podcast outlets or on WSTX AM radio down in the U.S. Virgin Islands, thank you for making us part of your listening day. Without further ado, we're going to get into this. Sean's going to introduce our guest today, and we're going to get into this conversation. Very, very excited. Sean, how you doing, bud? Feeling good?
Hey, that I am. Yeah.
It looks like you're wearing a robe. Is that a sweatshirt? What is that? I can't really.
Plush sweater, maybe. Yeah.
Oh, look at you. That's very nice.
It's a sweater that constitutes a voice like this, which is just an inch within PBS.
Okay.
So,
that's nice.
Okay.
There you go. Yeah.
So you're grounded and centered today is basically what you're saying.
Yes, and I think it matches my new glasses or whatever. I don't know. But I'm just thankful in here.
Good.
Having some challenges / opportunities that's special needs related, which I'll share as we navigate our way through, because I think that if I post on social media or share with the general world, oh my gosh, I woke up today and I stubbed my toe, that's sympathy. If I wake up and I say I stubbed my toe and here's how I got through it, that's value. So, well, that will be forthcoming. But more importantly than that, I'm excited to just get into our show today, because I am excited for the value that is going to be brought by our guest. So our guest today is someone who is an award-winning composer, writer, performer, things of those sorts from a creative standpoint, but also someone who is a good example of what I just talked about in terms of adding value rather than just looking at a problem, but looking at a solution, because he has a child that was diagnosed with epilepsy. And what did he do about it? How did he decide to create a solution? Well, by, among other things, writing a musical about it. So he's here to talk about that with us, but also about sort of his origin as an individual, because that has everything to do with how we deal with the diagnosis and how we gauge our way through life. So welcome to Just Two Dads, Mr. Ben Decter. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you, Sean. And thanks, Brian. I'm glad to be
great
here.
to have you. Great to have you.
Yep. We always say that one of the first qualifications for being a hero is that you have no idea that you're one. You don't see yourself as one. But that is exactly who we see you as. And every hero has an origin. And from those origins, that's where the superpowers come from. So why don't we start with that, telling us a bit about where you're from, how you were raised, where you're from, literally, spiritually, geographically, all those things, because they play a role in everything that we do. Why don't we start there?
Yeah, you're talking about deep origins, like the early years?
Yeah, sure. Whatever you feel comfortable sharing with us.
Sure. Yeah, I think you're right. I actually do think about that quite often, how even your own parents and where you're from affects what happens later. So I was born in Manhattan, and my parents were a physician. My dad's an oncologist, hematologist, and my mom was a therapist. So the two things beyond that, so beyond growing up with parents in the healing professions. So my mom was a great listener and a therapist, and my dad, treated cancer patients for his whole life. He just retired a couple of years ago. My mom loved talking about things. I would say it was often harder for my dad to talk about emotional things. And after the early years in New York, we moved out to New Jersey. So where I grew up was Montclair, New Jersey. And Montclair, New Jersey is a beautiful town in the Northeast that I believe to this day, could be wrong, I think of it as one of the most diverse towns around. So I grew up.
Know of it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in a school, in my memory, it was Black and white and Italian and Irish and some wealthy kids and some really poor kids and just everything. And there we all were. And to this day, I'm in touch with many people who grew up at that time in Montclair. And we all feel like it was just a fabulous place to grow up and be a kid. And it was, it was a special place. So I'm really happy to have been from there. And then I went away to college. I was at Harvard for 4 years and I loved it and met some really interesting people from all over the world doing all kinds of things. And right after graduation that summer, I moved out. My girlfriend, who I had met doing a musical my freshman year, her sophomore year, we did a production of Godspell. I had come out to LA to be an actress, and I had always wanted to try my hand at doing music. As I said, I didn't know what that would entail. I thought it would most certainly not entail doing music for film and television. That was something I knew nothing about. So I thought it would be just having some kind of rock band, which is something I did in high school.
That's great.
So I joined her out in LA, and we did start a band. And that was hard. I think it was something I thought I wanted to do, but it turned out that was not my comfort zone, being on stage. I really liked being the guy writing and producing the songs. And so after a few years of doing that, my wife decided to go to law school, and I had a chance meeting with a composer out here. There's two. There's one guy named Fred Myro, who I started working with for a year, and he was, to this day, I think of him as the most creative, skilled person I'd ever met. And he was writing an opera, he was writing a theater piece, a musical, scoring a film.
So the girlfriend became the wife.
My girlfriend became the wife. That is correct.
Yes, gotcha.
That was
a year with Fred, and I learned a lot. Just that idea of having a creative life. He had a beautiful home and a studio in his home right below the Hollywood sign. And after a year of that, I met a guy who I had known and heard of as a kid. He had written the music for a favorite show of mine called Hill Street Blues, and I had the sheet music as a kid. And
Mike Post.
Mike Post, that is correct.
Mike Post is
He's the guy.
I was never really into Hill Street Blues. When I was in high school, I was in play production, and one of my castmates, actually, her dad worked on the show. Was a regular on the show. I think he worked in tech, and I had a Hill Street Blues T-shirt that she had given me. But everything that Mike posted, that White Shadow,
White Shadow. Let's talk about that. I love the White Shadow. Yeah.
Are you kidding me? I binged on that entire thing. That show was so ahead of its time.
Amazing.
We could have a whole nother conversation about that, but
for sure.
So I spent a year working at Mike's studio, and that's the first time I thought, like, wow, this is unbelievable. Like, how fun is it working on TV music? I thought maybe that's a way I can actually make a living, and I love being in the studio. It was great. So that I was there for a year at his studio, and then for a few years after that, we would do shows together. We would share screen credit. I was writing the majority of the music out of my own studio in my home here in Silver Lake, where I live. And at that time, while working at Mike's, was when my wife and I, Jackie, we got married, and very quickly after that, had our first child. And it was a magical time. Yeah. And we took a trip for the first time to Italy, which was unbelievable. If you haven't, I would recommend it. And if you have a baby, because it's just like, we couldn't walk down the street without people putting out their arms and just asking to hold the baby. We couldn't walk into a restaurant without like a maitre d' saying, "You eat, I'll hold the baby." I mean, I've never seen anything like that in this country. I love it here.
Right.
Yeah. It was crazy. Even on the plane trip over, she would just be passed from passenger to passenger. It was like a plane full of Italian grandparents. I mean,
what region did you visit?
We went north. So we were in Florence, and then we went up to Lago di Como.
Okay.
And I think we went to Venice, and I just thought it was like a magical bubble. And that magical bubble lasted until she was 17 months old. And it was at that time when, as we show in the musical, that's when my wife, Jackie, because I don't know if I was choosing not to see it or just what she said, I think something's going on. She should be saying some words. She should be pointing at objects. Yeah, I thought everything was fine. And she said, I think it's not. And we went to see, again, being Hollywood, strange things happen. That was recently after Heidi Fleiss had been in the news, and her dad was our pediatrician, Dr. Paul Fleiss. He was great. And Dr. Fleiss said, I don't know, I think it might be absence seizures or something, but I think you need to go to Children's Hospital. And he managed to get us in there. And in my mind, within a matter of days, we had the EEG. It looked, even I'm not a doctor, but I could tell that was a disaster. It was all like crazy waves.
Let me ask you this really quick. And it's funny because we were talking about our friend in common, Greg Grunberg, and we had conversations with Greg around epilepsy. And I don't know if I recall hearing with him and hadn't heard with anyone else that milestones in terms of pointing, speaking, communication, and things like that being delayed when it comes to epilepsy. I had not heard of that before. I don't recall that.
I think, as I have learned over the years, there's so many different types of epilepsy, right? So I have now met people that I've had conversations with as if I were talking to the two of you right now, and the guy will say like, oh, hold on a second, seizure. Okay, cool. And then the conversation continues. So I don't think there's any particular delays with that type of situation. And then, of course, there's those scary ones you see in the movies, like the Grand Mal. Everything in between. And I think some of them really can mess with your development. Some of them can leave you unable to walk and talk. And some of them just mean that a couple times a year, you have a tough day and you got to lie down for the day. I mean, so it's just everything and anything.
Let me ask you,
Ben, how long ago? How long ago was your daughter born? How long?
She was born she's a Halloween baby of 1996. So she just turned 28.
Wow. Okay. You mentioned something that I have an affinity for, drawn to, and I think is very important, generally speaking. And I wonder if it played a role in how you responded to the diagnosis. And that is the fact that you grew up at a time that, because I feel that I was born in like this perfect period, or grew up in this perfect time. And I think that if you feel that the time frame in which you grew up in is one that you're blessed to have been born in, or the community in which you were raised, that is huge. What kind of role, if any, do you think that played in your outlook on life and how you dealt with the diagnosis and what it took to forge ahead with that?
Yeah, I that's sort of a big concept. I feel like I felt like really lucky to be born the time I was, and certainly I don't know of any other time because that is the time.
That's all we know.
When it was, so that was the time when as a kid, like we would just walk around during the summer, like walk up to there's like a pool and swim club, and we'd just be there on our own all day. And like our parents would pick us at the end of the day, we'd be dropped off, like things I guess you're mostly not allowed to do these days.
Exactly.
Or we just go to the park after school. We'd just be playing football, in Anderson Park until it got dark, and then you just went home. So there was
things that you would never let your kids do now at that age.
Right.
And I think that it gives a certain amount of, and obviously I'm not a therapist. I've never read it any place. I just feel very blessed to be where I'm from physically, figuratively, and the family I came from, time period, all that stuff. Yeah. And I think that if you feel that way, regardless of where you come from, at least I think that it has a lot to do with my outlook. That in any belief that you might have in something greater than yourself allows you to, I think it's easier to find some kind of resolve when faced with a challenge. And I just wondered if that was any of your observation or if that made sense to you.
Well, it's so yes, I think that does. And I guess I also had, because it was such a mixed in every way community, I think I just always felt open to it sounds so silly, but I feel like these days everything is so identity conscious.
Yeah.
And there's good and maybe bad about that. And I can remember a conversation, I felt kind of silly, but at some point in middle school, I remember someone asked me, was like that they mentioned a friend of mine named Catherine. They said, it's amazing you guys are good friends and that your best friend is Black. And I said, what are you talking about? She's not Black. And they looked at me and said, I feel kind of silly saying it because it sounds like such a cliche, but like I literally didn't see it. I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. And so I think that affects the way we grow up. I think growing up with my dad as a doctor,
that's what I was going to ask you.
It made me think that, I had great faith in the medical system. I really think of it as those are people there to help. So when the shit hit the fan with Addie, I was like, okay, well, let's get into it. And it made me feel like that I could ask questions. I could also reach out to my dad, and my wife, Jackie's dad, is also a doctor. So when we had questions even about some of the drugs, I remember like my dad was like, well, I'll call the drug company. Let's ask them if they have any experience with infantile spasms and what side effects do they know about? Because it says there's been, for example, there was one drug called Felbitol. And it was a scary drug because the word was, and the fact was, kids had died taking it. So my dad was like, let's call the company. Let's see what that's about. So he was able to call them because there's a confidence that these are conversations that can be had. And they said, look, we know some kids have died. The fact is, we strongly believe that, I think it was 8 deaths. 7 of those deaths had absolutely nothing to do with the drug. There were some serious comorbidities with those children. Wow. And we think maybe 1. And then the odds change. Then you think, 1, that's horrible. But as my dad would like to say, have you ever read the side effects on a bottle of aspirin? I mean, people die. Like there's of course there's risk. And so things like that affected our confidence or our ability to jump in on things like drug trials that we were part of 2 different drug trials. So yeah, I guess in that sense too, back to your original question, Sean, like your background affects the way you see the world.
And then I would think also having your mother as a therapist, that had to, and you can tell me, but enable the processing for you, because how do you deal with some of those emotions, or how do you again process what you're dealing with internally as the parent of a child with a diagnosis, having somebody with some therapeutic background?
Right. Well, my feeling about that is that it perhaps, I think I'm a very good listener. I think I've always been a good listener, and I think she was a great listener. I don't think I was so great at expressing myself. And I think that is what I've come to see is what, for example, you mentioned the musical. That's The musical is about a family dealing with epilepsy, but I think what it's really about is communication and how hard it can be to talk about hard things within a family. And I think, much like my own life, so when Jackie and I used to get in fights or something in our early years as a couple, I think, oh, well, that's it. I guess we're breaking up. And she'd be like, what are you talking about? We're not breaking up. We're just having an argument. I'm like, oh, because I didn't have that example. Like I didn't see my parents fight and then get together. They would just they didn't really talk about that. And then instead of bringing up feelings, which is something I wasn't great at, I think I would turn inward. So I'd get quiet, or it would come out in the handful of like sort of road ragey kind of behavior.
That's me. You just described me.
Yeah, it would come out in a fun way, but it also came out. I ended up going to a boxing gym, a really great gym for like 10 years. And that was a great space to get out feelings, but that's still not talking about them. So really the big change for me came when I started to write songs about what I was going through, which is again, sort of private and intimate. And that's how it started. And then it was over the past 15
But it's still cathartic though. Yeah.
It was.
Now, let me ask you,
15 years ago? Hold on. That started, you started to say that started 15 years ago. We started writing songs.
It started specifically, called 17 years ago.
Okay. Now, that's still one of the greatest things about being able to get through a challenge, a problem. You know, part of my language, Brian will tell you, because I'm always looking at myself and where can I, improve. We talk about raising consciousness all the time. That's a higher level of self-awareness than the average human has. And it's a higher level of self-awareness than most men have. So did your self-awareness, does that come from, because you just pinpointed what you did, what you didn't do, where you were short, where you were strong, where you were weak? That's huge. And do you think that is credited solely from expressing it through your art? Or is that a combination of therapy as well, if you don't mind my asking? Or is it reading books?
No, it's a great question. So it's all those. I'm an avid reader. Also, there was a school when things were really at their hardest with my little girl when she was 4. That was like the really the hardest of the hard times. We stumbled into a therapeutic preschool that was located in Los Angeles at Cedars-Sinai. They had a school within the hospital. Like, who would have thunk it? There it was.
Wow.
It's a small school. It still exists.
I'm just going to ask that question.
It's no longer within the hospital, but when you go to that school, they're like, hey, nice to meet you. So when you have issues with your kids, it affects the whole family. So if you're coming here, just know that you're going to be required to participate in, I think it was biweekly couples counseling and biweekly group therapy. So it was 2 classes of 8 or 9 kids each. And again, I think it was every other week. You had a parent support group, and then maybe it was every other week, or once a month, you had couples counseling. So that's where, like, those early parent support groups, Jackie would be talking about all the difficulties we were having with our daughter, and I would just want her to stop talking because I was like, this stuff is private. We're going to keep it private. And then it was through that process, and this great group leader who I still love today, Ellen Reinstein, she would sort of gently encourage me to talk. And then really the first time I spoke about it, I saw how happy Jackie was. And she said later, like, it was like I was giving a gift to our family and to us as a couple by sharing in the talking about these things and what things were hard. And incredibly to me, so this is now a long time ago. So Addie was 4, now she's 28. Once a month on Saturday mornings, that support group still meets online. And part of what we do is helping the young families, those with the kids who are really going through it now. And I think it helps give them a leg up. And it also helps those of us who are still dealing with things like, hey, what's going on in your life? How are the kids? Now they're adult kids. How are they doing? How are we doing? It's been really a beautiful thing.
Wow.
Amazing.
That's fantastic. That's great.
And that's the Little Helpers organization.
Oh, it's called Cheerful Helpers. Cheerful Helpers.
Cheerful Helpers.
Yes, it's a really unusual name. And one of our favorite people in the world, Janet Upjohn, is the executive director of that. And we are still on the board. And Yeah, it's a really great program. They now have their own building, having been kicked out of Cedars many years ago, right
Yeah.
on Jefferson Boulevard in the middle of Los Angeles, and people come from all over the city.
Yeah.
Wow.
I actually was at the event, the birthday event or the annual event
Oh, amazing. Okay.
a
Yeah.
little while ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an amazing organization, and hearing all of the progress and what folks are doing. It's a great organization, and what an
All right.
amazing resource. Not everybody has that. And it's interesting, I must say, I don't know, you can confirm you lucked out in finding that, but
Complete luck.
if
Complete luck. Yeah.
completely luck. And isn't that sad, right? Because of the amazing work that they do, that those kinds of resources should be available, everywhere.
They've gotten better at it. They really have. Now they have a beautiful website and they do outreach. But at that time, it was really like this little, not secretive on purpose, but it was just like know.
Well, it kind of happens to be that way because it's like, okay, we've been doing this podcast for 4 years now.
Yeah.
My son is 18.
Okay.
Diagnosed with autism at the age of 3. Brian's daughter was diagnosed with apraxia and microcephaly at the age of 3. And just this week she turned 29, Brian.
Yep. 29.
Wow. Okay.
Wow. Yep.
And so that means that we've got some hands and tentacles into the special needs community. You're aware, you're in the know and all that kind of thing. But I am constantly amazed at how on a weekly basis, the onion that is our community and the resources, it seems like with every layer you pull back, not only is there another one, but the onion continues to grow. And on one hand, it's amazing because you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that exists. Yeah. That's so great. I've had, within the last 24 hours, 2 resources I knew nothing about. But at the same time, you're like, does everybody know about this? They should.
Yeah. Yep.
So tell us about a little bit about how your daughter's doing now, if as much or as little as you care to. And then let's talk about the evolution of and the birth of this musical.
Well, and you have a second child as well, right?
Yeah, we do. So Addie has a little brother named Leo, who is 25. Addie in so many ways was really lucky. So there was medicine after many years of no such luck and some really hard schooling years and trying different schools. Some great experiences, like at Frostig in Pasadena. They had a great arts program that really resonated with her. She was at the help group at Bridgeport for a number of years. She got on a drug study, and the drug stopped her seizures at the age of 9. So then with the seizures stopped, nothing changed right away. But several years later, she learned to read at the age of 13. And I think what's amazing about that was that just that idea that our brains keep developing. And so with the seizure stop, she was able to start learning and participating in school. And then she said, school, she liked school, but she wasn't going to go to college. And then Addie, being Addie, decided at one point that she was really interested in Korea, in the Korean language. And she'd like to go to school in Korea. And she had a childhood occupational therapist who is Korean and Australian, who ran a program there. And Addie applied. I tried to set up all these roadblocks so she couldn't go to Korea. Like, well, if you can fill out the application. And then she did. And I said, well, if you get in, and then she did. And then I said, well, that's an expensive plane ticket if you can get the money together. So she did a semester in Korea and then came back and started taking classes at Glendale Community College, which was fantastic. And a lot of it happened in the pandemic. So it was on Zoom. And I thought, this is going to be terrible. And it was great. Her professors were great. And I would hear her interacting like I didn't even recognize her. I didn't even know she could do this. Just talking about whatever it was, women's history. She loved history. It was the coolest thing. And I think she has proven to be so resilient. She loved the fact that I boxed, and I brought her sometimes to the gym, and she took to it like nobody's business. So she started doing some MMA training, and then she got into jiu-jitsu, and the speed version, and she's now, I can't remember what degree, brown belt in jiu-jitsu, and she teaches women's jiu-jitsu class, I think 2 nights a week, and trains herself, I think every day. I think she goes
Wow. Now, are you half joking, or you mean literally that you were like, let me get this in her way, let me give her this challenge, or were you really hoping that she, like, is that in retrospect, or were you at the time really thinking, let me put this roadblock in her way? I don't want to stop her, but I don't necessarily want her to go, because I could see that going both ways.
I'm going to say that it's the latter. It's just what you said. I would, as Jackie would say, why would we ever get in the way of her dreams? But then I would say, well, I can think of a couple reasons to get in the way. Like, one, it's really scary. Like, oh my God, she doesn't know how to use an ATM. She's never lived on her own. And so she's just going to go to Korea. Like, that's really far away.
It's not like it's Canada, right?
I'm getting anxiety just thinking of that. Yeah.
So I got anxiety, and yeah, it's by the way, it happens it's happening as we speak. Addie got on a plane yesterday to go to London, and the same thing. I'm like, oh my God. Like, so I think maybe part of it is just being a parent of any kid. I think even my own dad still worries to this day. Not me. So I think there's a little bit of that. And I think, and then with the special needs, like so Addie's doing great. She lives on her own. She lives at the Children's Ranch, which is the organization my wife started, which offers therapeutic animal caretaking for kids and young adults here right in the middle of Los Angeles. So, but still, there's plenty of things that are hard for her. So it's always.
And what's the name of the ranch? Because we're going to make sure we put that up too in a few minutes.
Called the Children's Ranch Foundation. And the Children's Ranch is right in Atwater Village, and it's just a beautiful place. It's like a little sanctuary for kids and parents in the middle of town.
We'll have to have your wife on and have a whole conversation about that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That'd be great.
Definitely.
That'd be great. But you started to talk about, again, her progress and what she's doing. So
yeah, so so right now she works. So every day she works at the ranch. She works with the younger kids and some of the older kids. It's actually some of the kids that also work with her went to Cheerful Helpers 20 years ago. They're now working at the ranch. She's the most empathetic and least judgmental person I've ever met. So between doing the ranch and then every day going to jiu-jitsu, it's really full. She has a really full days. She is the adventure club master. She is always game for adventures. I mean, Jackie told me, I didn't even know this. She said, oh yeah, her and a couple of the guys went down to LA Gun Club downtown, and she learned how to shoot a rifle. And I'm like, what? Like, oh my God. We are not a rifle gun family. I'm like, that's what? So yeah, amazing. She is she's a character.
Amazing.
Wow.
Can we I definitely want to talk about the musical, but before we do it, I'm curious about her brother, and talk about your son a little bit, and how he's dealt with this. We're always curious to know how siblings process, and I think siblings of special needs kids have a different way of processing the world themselves. They're empathetic. There's a whole bunch of things. So you can talk about him a little bit.
Well, it's a great question. So so her little brother Leo, I would say in general, was always a precocious kid. Things came quite easy to him. He was a very athletic and musical kid. Still is. He went off to an Ivy League school. He came back, and it was still the pandemic after he graduated. And I think what he has shared with me, and again, this great article just came out this morning in the LA Times, and he's quoted in it as saying like that he feel like he's getting to know her now as an adult, a whole new relationship. And I think the musical, part of why I wrote the musical was trying to express the whole family's feelings, and the musical is told through the younger brother's perspective. So it's based on probably a lot of my fears of what Leo was thinking back in the time. So the narrator in the show, the little boy based on my son, is 11 and the big sister's 13. And he sings songs. One of the songs that literally gets gasps from the audience. I've heard it. Starts off, the first line is, "I didn't ask to be in this family. I didn't ask to be your son."
That's the truth.
It is, and then he directs it to his parents, and then he directs it to his sister, and he sings, "I can't stand that I'm smarter than you. It's not how I want it to be.
Wow.
I wish there was something I could do to make your brain seizure free." And it really speaks to what, again, my fears about him. It's tough. No one would ask for that. And I think now, I know he and Addie both have really made an effort. They'll tell me sometimes, they'll get breakfast together. That's the ranch. Yeah, he'll go over there and join her for meals. And it's really been a lot. It's really been a lot. There's Kristen, my partner in the musical.
Wow.
She's your director, yeah?
And she's the director and co-book writer.
Beautiful.
Yeah. It's even the way they describe that, the caption, like an emotionally avoidant composer dad, burned out corporate lawyer mom, a sweet older sister with epilepsy, and a charismatic younger brother tasked with taking care of her. Now, in real life, he was not tasked with taking care of her, but he might have felt responsible.
Yeah.
Interesting. And how long have you been working on this? And by the way, let me just repeat, because we're throwing stuff on the screen, forgetting that people are listening on podcasts. The name of the title of the musical is "It's All Your Fault," Tyler Price.
Yes.
So to talk about, first of all, how long you've been working on it, and then the title I love. So how did that come about? And we put it up on the screen as well, the URL, the tylerpricemusical.com, so people can read about the story. But if they don't get to that, describe that for us a little bit.
Yeah. So the title came about, it was based on a true incident during middle school when one of my son's friends was over here with a bunch of guys and decided to make fun of someone having a seizure. And my son, so Leo promptly escorted him out of the house. And a couple of days later, the young boy and his mom came over to apologize. And Leo asked the boy if he was done. And the boy said he was done. And then Leo left. So he just wasn't ready to accept the apology. And so in the musical version, we sort of dramatize it as if the young boy sees the school bully making fun of his sister and punches him in the face, and then gets in trouble and says, like, "Look, you better make a statement explaining your actions and why you did what you did." And the first act is about him plotting, like, "Well, I'm not going to do a stupid statement. You know what? I'm going to steal my dad's music. I'm going to put on a musical." And then act 2 is his musical that this kid puts on. So based on a version of something that
actually happened.
Yeah.
And how long have you and
Kristen
been working on it?
A very long time. It's been 17 years. So
oh my God!
Oh wow!
Yeah,
So when you said you were writing music to express,
yes, that was this.
This is it. Oh my God!
Yeah. So that was, so it's 17 years. So that's for songs. Then we would do, like, we did a workshop in Manhattan, and then we'd go away and each do our different projects. And then we do a workshop in Hollywood, these 29-hour workshops where you have a week basically with actors. So we've done a half dozen of those over the years. And finally, a year ago, we said, you know what? We're ready. We're ready to do an actual production. And, with the fortuitous meeting at Epilepsy Awareness Day at Disneyland, which I was just at Monday. So a year ago, I was introduced to some people from a pharma company. And they asked what I was up to. And I told them about this project. And they said, well, that's interesting. And that's interesting. That's from the siblings' point of view. That aligns with something we're really trying to bring more attention to, and also in de-stigmatizing epilepsy. So then we had many months of conversations about how they can help. And that's part of how this production came to be, is this company has been our, like, a main sponsor.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And it's, I mean, it's so unusual to have a pharma company be involved in this manner. I mean,
Yes.
I can think about it. Obviously, you have corporations that, need a feel good, something to sponsor, but this is in
Right.
line, it sounds like, in line with their internal mission.
I think it's in line with their mission. I also think, I mean, look, I don't know. It's hard to tell when you're in the midst of it, but it does seem like, and maybe it's always the case, but and entertainment and funding for the arts, like it's hard, and it's always shifting, and it's a hard proposition. And I feel like, of course, we're used to it in sports, right? Where we have the Staples Center and every other thing. So I don't know. Maybe it's just a new model. We'll see in the years to come if this is part of a new model where some companies are interested in actually, like, why shouldn't a play be sponsored by?
Well, I mean,
I don't know.
Go back to the early days of television. I mean, soap operas were sponsored by detergent companies. So,
Right.
I mean, yeah. I don't know. Yeah. Like everything's like, the Pepsi, Frito-Lay, college football playoff.
yeah, sure.
Yeah. But at least, but we're conditioned to see the worst, or at least, have a side eye. So going back to, Brian's example, that's like, you kind of think of that's strictly a money grab. And, in terms of the old stuff and who originally sponsored shows.
Yeah.
But like just like Ben is saying, you're kind of like, well, wait a minute, this seems a little altruistic, and it's mission driven, is it? But what I love about you, Ben, is that you seem to have just ridiculous balance.
Yeah.
More so than human being. And what I mean by that is that people are usually altruistic and naive and all in one direction and totally blind to the other. But here you are, first of all, talking about your strengths, your weaknesses, your fears, and everything, and this high level of self-awareness, which is something that we should all aspire to. And then even as you're talking about being appreciative for the sponsorship and everything, you've done your work for the farm company, because I'm like, who's the pharma company? I'd like to know. I'm curious about them. That's kind of a good thing. But at the same time, you're like, so far so good, but I don't know. And that's not a negative thing. That's just a very, you seem rooted in objective reality. That's not a place that most humans get to easily.
I appreciate that. And I think that's something I love that. I love that you said that. And I think I strive to do that. I really do like being with what is and like going forward from there. The pharma company is called UCB. It's a Belgian company. They have a US headquarters. They also have sponsored another epilepsy-based project called Under the Lights, which started as a short film that's now being made into a feature film.
Wow.
And it all ties together with people you already know. So Lake Bell, who used to be my neighbor here in Silver Lake,
I love her.
was cast in this film, Under the Lights. I saw her on Greg's podcast. So like it's all full circle stuff. And it's the same company is sponsoring that film. And they have been amazing. And they like specifically, they have no interest, and they will not. They don't want any money from this project of mine or the film. Like literally, it's like $0.00. That has nothing to do with their interest. They are just, I think they are hoping it helps them facilitate their mission and show how they're being a good corporate citizen of the world and trying to help bring awareness to people. They've really been phenomenal partners and just fun, warm, great, smart people. It's just, we really feel so fortunate.
We're really excited. We are coming to see the event on December 1st, just to see the
amazing. Okay.
project. So yeah, we'll be part of the Cheerful Helpers group of folks that are coming, and we're really excited to see it. I'm bringing my son as well. So just again, sibling of child with special needs issues. And again, I feel like they have, such a different sense of empathy than I think their average kids their age. So I'm excited for him to see that. This is really amazing. Beyond this run that you currently are on, is there plans for, 17 years in the works. Is there plans for this to either extend or go into some other format, or can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, that's the hope. So Kristen and I have every hope that this is, by the way, it always feels like the beginning. Everything I do always feels like, like we're just getting started. I don't know if you guys feel like that with the podcast.
Oh, yeah.
That's a good thing. That's a good thing.
We have that conversation a lot.
And we should go through life. That's something to seek. Like they
Yeah.
say, when is the last time you've done something for the first time? Yeah. It would be horrible if everything feels like I've done that before. But
you're right.
So that's something to strive for. Make as many things feel like it's the beginning. That's great. So go ahead.
I agree. I love it. So we're embracing it. So we feel like in some ways, even if you're 17 years, here we are at the beginning. We have every hope of absolutely. And there's been, again, I don't know if it's because we live in Los Angeles, so there's a lot of action around here. So yes, we've already had producers, both movie type producers and theatrical producers reaching out like, hey, we'd love to talk. And we're like, great, we're happy to talk. And, take one day at a time and just see. Kristen and I, for as long as we've been working on this production, at the top of our little, what is it, Google Doc or something that we work on, on like goals, the first goal that hasn't changed since day one is just make the best darn show we can in Los Angeles. And that's awesome. It. So we really try to focus on that is what we can control right now. Let's just make this best it can be.
The TV series Atypical, what I thought was, again, a great portal into that world, of a child with autism and how the family deals with the other dynamics. And I think any time that something like that hits mainstream, it furthers the mission, if you will, for everybody. And so fingers crossed that that works for you in some form or another. And I love the fact that I'm going to say this for those who are local to Southern California, especially to Los Angeles, the Hudson Theater and some of the smaller theaters in Hollywood are really, they're like these birthing spots of phenomenal projects. I've seen a number of shows at that theater and others in that particular area. And the nice thing is, for an audience, you feel like you are part of the process. And so Sean's putting up on the, so I'm excited for that because I love that theater. Sean, up on the top right-hand side of that screen, you should see a white X maybe up at the top on the right. You see it? Because it'll.
I actually don't.
I think it's hidden.
Yeah, I don't see that. Yeah, I only see the X that closes the entire browser, which is odd. But
what if you click below, like below the
purple banner?
Yeah, exactly. Like, does it go away?
No.
No.
So weird. No.
No. That's right. On the screen for those who are listening, it's the tickets are now on sale. So as Ben and I talked just before we started, show's been in, the first premiere, the first iterations, and now we're ready to go, to go live and full audience. And so really excited for you and for this project. And amazing. I told, as I shared with you, I told Sean I'm gonna have to bring an entire box of Kleenex. I just, I feel this stuff emotionally, and I just, I just get the sense from reading the article that was out in today's LA Times, print version of LA Times, and you can find it online, as Sean posted earlier, an article about Ben and his family and the musical. So, reach out or seek that out. Google it if you have to, and read up on this if you're not local to the area. And I just the emotionality that has already been expressed. I know, like, I'm going to be teary-eyed the whole way. So, anyways, I'm excited to see this musical and see what you do on this.
It's just another example, two things, which we always say, and we realize, again, doing this show and everything, not just prior experience being members of the special needs and caregiving community, which is that anything that affects the general population affects our population 10 times, tenfold, at the very least, on a human level. And then on a general level, when it comes to humanity, anything that anyone can do to make larger the room in which we stand, where we realize that we're not the only ones in that room, is immeasurable in value. And that's that's the reason why we decided to, why we're here doing the podcast, because we find that all the time. And when you just, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one that feels that way. You know, I am not alone. And you mentioned something earlier that I think is really great too, and which I think most people are not either unwilling or unable to articulate, which is that one, there's immeasurable value in identifying, whether it's one's gender, race, whatever the case might be, because inclusion and representation is immeasurable in value, because in our history as a country and as a society, it's been missing, and the damage that it does when it's missing is insidious. By the same token, and then this goes back to your balance you're talking about before becoming a parent, when you were saying that your friend, when someone says, oh, I don't see color, as a person of color, that could feel like, well, I appreciate that on one hand, but it means that you don't, see me. There's value in seeing that, right? While also seeing the things that we have in common. And, it's just a whole nother conversation to talk about. But again, like everything else, anything that affects the general population affects ours tenfold. And I just think it falls into everything that we talk about in terms of being curious. And I just think you're a great example of all those things. And I'm so appreciative for it.
No, I appreciate you saying that. And I think some of the things you're saying, like I think it's going to be wild. Like the words you're saying, you'll actually hear them in the lyrics. I mean, there's a song where the bridge starts and the lyric is inclusion. And yeah, I think it's like,
well, I'm a lyricist by nature too. So much so that when I say things, and Brian will tell you this, we were talking about this within my family the other day. When I communicate, people are either like, oh my gosh, that's profound, and I feel the same way, or I get that, or if I'm moving fast enough, they're like, what the heck are you saying? So
I have a book of all of his sayings, because he's like
he literally does.
Really? Yeah. Anyways,
we'll talk about that offline.
Yeah. So much more we can talk about, but we're like, our hour always goes fast when we're having a conversation. When we love, especially when we love the subject matter, it actually kind of makes us angry, because we're like, there's so many more things for us to talk about. But we'll get to do that in person, hopefully very soon. And so this is the part of the show. I'll throw it over to Sean. Who's going to ask you our key question.
Okay.
Of the day. So go ahead, Sean.
Yes. And as I ask the question, I also want to give context, props, and flowers to Brian, because Brian's response to this question and the impetus for this question within the show is another example of everything you've displayed here today in terms of awareness, raising one's consciousness and being aware. When I first came up with this question, I kind of would just ask it, and it all worked out each time. But Brian, as the show's developing, Brian said, I don't know if I like that question. I don't know if it could really throw somebody off. I don't know if we should be doing that. And then I pushed back a little and said, well, no, it's got great value. There's something to it. Then he came back and said to me, you know what? I realized what it is I don't like about it. It made me uncomfortable, and it's discomfort that I need. But at the same time, you're asking it without context. Without context, kind of throws somebody off. With that said, it goes as follows, which is our ability to change the world, right? No matter how great or small, is tied to our ability or our willingness to change ourselves. So with that said, give us just one example of a belief or a thought that you once held dearly and really believed, but no longer believe to be true.
It's a great question. It gives me chills even hearing it. It's really okay. The first thing that comes to mind is, I think, so I'll give you the example. It's back to the question you asked at the very beginning of like origin story of my parents. So I can remember times, and it sort of happened again just recently, of like seeing my dad as a kid, like to say like his hand was cut and bleeding. And I'd say like, hey, Dad, what happened? And he'd say, I'm fine. And that was the end of that. There was no talking about it. And I think that was sort of, so I've had this experience during the musical of friends who I grew up with. I mentioned Montclair, New Jersey. I had 4 people who were with me in those days fly out to see the show this past weekend. Their response after seeing the show was, we feel like we weren't there for you when you were going through. And I said, oh, well, how could you have been? I didn't tell you what was happening. So I didn't talk about it. And it's not because I thought no one wants to hear this. It's not because of anything else other than I would just sort of like, this was going on. It's too much. and I just sort of shut it down. And I would just be here with my family. I'd want to just hold my daughter and just rest and be with my wife, Jackie, and my son, Leo. And that was enough. And if my sister called or my parents called, how's it going? I'd say, we're doing all right. That was that. And I certainly wasn't reaching out to friends. And I feel like that wasn't even a belief. It was just that's what was happening. It wasn't like I believed that there was strength in not talking about it. That's just where I was. And I
You're
think
programmed for that.
Correct.
You're programmed to soldier on. And, if I can get out there without putting anybody's stuff out there, just because we talk, Brian and I have real conversations, man, uncomfortable ones too. And everything you've just said, that's how Brian's programmed. If I want to know how Brian's doing, I need to take out a shovel. And by the same token, because he's programmed that way, he's not going to take out a shovel to ask me how I'm doing. He'll take out a feather duster. How's it going, man? And it's just like it's surface, because you're not out. One isn't always prepared to dig deep. So you've given everybody that's listening an answer there. It's okay to. People can't help you if they don't necessarily know. It's okay to ask for help. And it's not even, sometimes you're not even asking for help. You're just, not too sure. Like when you said, we're doing okay. I think that's saying more than most of us. That's someone telling you that despite the fact that you don't know what level, they're not quite doing okay. And sometimes, you can say, well, I'm here if you need me. Or you can, if they're the type of person that's going to take you up on it, or you can dig in and be like, hey, is there something you want to talk about? We're all learning. We're all learning.
It can be different things at different times. That's another thing too. So I think so in a nutshell, the story of the musical starts with a guy who won't talk about it to learning over the course of the show, like, it can be so great and healthy to talk about it. And that mirrors my life experience of learning. Like I wouldn't talk about it originally in parent group or with Jackie. And then over the years, it's like, well, let me write a musical about it. And now here I am. And like you guys, this is happening in real time. So this guy, me, who wouldn't talk about it. So I wake up and see on the cover of the LA Times, he wrote a musical about his daughter's epilepsy. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe what I'm talking about. Like there's a part of me, a small part, but a part that's like, I want to run and hide. Like this is so much exposure of like some truly personal, intimate things. But I feel like by doing it, I've already seen it in the theater, people who are coming up and so like whatever the hardcore guys or people who are just that they can't even talk after the show.
Yeah.
They can't talk. They're speechless. And I think it's, or it's the opposite. I've gotten beautiful emails. Like it just makes them, it's like you said, Sean, too, like someone told me about memoirs. Like I love reading memoirs, that you read a memoir.
I love that too.
You think you're reading about Magic Johnson or whoever, Harriet Tubman, it doesn't matter. But really as you're reading it subconsciously, you're thinking, tell me more about me.
Yeah. Because you identify. That's what it's about.
So that's what these people are watching this musical. And sure, it's based on me and my family. But what they're really thinking is, how am I with my son? And I've had people tell me like, I feel like we've been neglecting my daughter or my son or so much attention on this. Or I've had people in the cast or people working on the set who are like, the character's name, the boy is Jackson. They're like, I'm Jackson. I grew up like that. That's me. Yeah. I felt like I got the short end. So it's just giving people another opportunity to talk and think about.
Yeah.
And as you said, it's about communication, I think, at the end of the day, and is amazing because you're going to be on Greg Grunberg's podcast, which is called Talk About It.
Talk About It.
Right. There it is. Hammered home right there.
And you just given me another ism, so to speak, which is that, connection is the greatest form of representation. It really is, because just like when they say that, when you go to a movie and you cry, during a scene or something like that, it might be because, something sad has taken place as well. But it's also because you see yourself in that character in so innate a way that you don't even realize it. Yeah. Wow. With that said.
Yeah. So Ben, thank you so much. We're really excited about seeing this musical. Again, it's called It's All Your Fault, Tyler Price. Really enjoyed spending this time with you. Can't wait to see you in person in a week and a half or so. And as I always say at the end of every episode, empathy and love is what it's all about. have a little empathy for those around you. You don't know what they're going through. They may be holding back. They may not be programmed to communicate. So have some empathy. And if you look at the world through lenses of love, the world's just a much better place. So thank you for sharing your story with us, and we can't wait to see the musical and actually talk to your wife on another episode of Just Your Dads. And before we sign off, we'll throw back over to Sean to sign us off formally.
Ben, thank you so very much. I'm so glad we met, and we're looking forward to not just being able to potentially work together, but a friendship with you. And again, to everyone within the sound of my voice, let's remember that questions are more powerful than statements. Try and be more childlike, less childish. And remember that, as we've discussed here today, everybody needs the same thing. Everybody needs to be seen, needs to be heard, needs to know that they matter, and needs to know that they are loved. So to each and everyone within the sound of my voice, thank you so much. We love you. And again, thanks to our partners, Billy Footwear. You click on the link that was shown on the screen earlier, and in the show link, the show notes, you get 15% off. Thank you so very much.
Thanks, everybody.
You guys. Thank you both so much.
Thank you, Ben. We'll see you all next week on Just Two Dads. Have a great week, everybody.